All I ask is a tall ship and a star to sail her by. All I ask is a tall ship and a star to sail her by. All I ask is a tall ship and a star to sail her by. Is that enough?
Yeah.
Can I keep this because this is written by Richard? I can frame this, couldn't I?
Yeah, that's how we all begin.
Hello, Princess.
I've known Stevie Wraith since Noah's Ark. Over the last 20 years, he's become one of my best pals. Nothing is too much for that man to help a mate out. He's always here for me. Gives me some good advice. Sorts me a bit of canteen out. Visits me. Has some good chats on the old dog and bone. Everybody loves him. Safe blowers, top villains, gangsters, serial killers, murderers, he knows them all. Just a great geezer. And I want to have a Guinness with him. Well, not a Guinness, a Newcastle Brown Ale. So I'm coming up there, we'll have a right laugh. All in all, top geezer. And I won't have a bad word said about it. Fantastic. Have a lovely Christmas, because next Christmas it's looking like I'm out there. You wouldn't want to be a turkey at Christmas, would you? God bless you all. Robin, Banks, alias Biggie Peterson, alias Charlie Salvador, alias Charlie Bronson.
Hostilities will end officially at 1 minute after midnight tonight, Tuesday, the 8th of May.
In post-war London, two promising boxers thrived as they rose from the ashes to become the most feared brothers in British criminal history. But in 1969, they were both sentenced to life in prison. This is the story of a young man's friendship with them in their final years. His friendship with Ronnie and Reggie Kray.
I was born on the 16th of February 1972 in a place called South Shields in the northeast of England to parents John and Celia. My dad at the time was an insurance broker and my mum was a nurse.
Stephen was a boisterous boy, typical, running around, doing everything that boys should do.
Very happy childhood. First memories are of moving from house to house. We were living in a place in Gateshead called Felgate, and then we moved briefly for a week or 2 weeks at a friend's house to Washington. And then we moved to Gateshead again, to a place called Hewith, which is where I spent a lot of my childhood. Just a stone's throw from a comprehensive school called Hewith Grange. Lived on a street called Laburnum Avenue, and spent so many, happy years there with my mum, my dad, and eventually a younger sibling, my brother, who's 7 years younger than me, Robert.
There was too much of a gap for them to be close. Stephen was very protective of Robert, and Robert did have trouble once at school on the school bus, and Stephen decided that he would go and sort that out, and so he did. So yes, he was protective, but that was about as close as they got, because as I say, it was a very big gap.
I used to read a lot. I was encouraged to read by my mother. She really loved reading herself, so she always said you'll always find solace in a good book. So
he was an interesting child. He read lots and lots and lots. So I'm not surprised, really, that he's chosen a path in writing, drama, etc. It doesn't surprise me at all.
You know, I used to read a lot of, Enid Blyton at the start, Famous Five, that kind of thing. And yeah, I mean, I got lost in, I guess, my own imagination. Used to watch a little bit of television. There wasn't as much television as there is these days, but would like to watch a lot of the the kids' programs at the time, like Cracker Jack and Scooby Doo and those kind of things. And of course outside, playing with the kids in the street. There was a lot of kids who lived in our street, so we would often play out on summer's days, go out and ride on our bikes and broaden our horizons and extend the boundaries a little bit and go a little bit further afield. So yeah, just there wasn't a great deal to do, but what we did, we did enjoy. And there was a council estate across the road from us. Our house was privately owned, but we used to knock around with the kids from the council estate, and I started playing football. We would play with jumpers for goalposts most of the time, but we would play out on the school field, and sometimes would start at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and finish at 10 o'clock at night. So lots of happy memories. I was 10 years old when I first encountered the Kray twins, and that was sitting in the living room at home, and the news came on, and it was the day of Violet Kray, who was the Kray twins' mother's funeral.
Well, that was a very sad affair. The boys were obviously devastated, but they were granted leave to come to that funeral. I mean, they had to, because they were so close to their mother. Their mother was their world.
Nothing else really from that moment on, ever came into my life about the Kray twins. And it wasn't until that little bit later when I was, out with them on the quayside on a Sunday morning, walking down the quayside market, the ripe old age of 15. It was staring up at us. It was 30 pence. It was an orange cover. Had this, rather distinctive photo of the Krays on the front that David Bailey had taken, with Ron in the front and Reg peeping over his shoulder. And just that cover drew me in, and I had a little bit of pocket money, and I just says, I want that book.
That book was one of the initial starts of the new phase of what ended up being called celebrity gangsters, although the real definition of the word I wouldn't know, but the profession of violence definitely started it to be a little bit gangster chic.
I looked at that book, read it within 2 days. The photographs were fascinating, all black and white imagery. They were always smartly dressed. They were associating with celebrities. They had, beautiful woman on Reg's arm. They drove fast cars. They were involved in bars and nightclubs, and it epitomised everything that I suppose an influential 15-year-old mind on Tyneside would really want in life. I'd fallen behind like many others in the class. Why bother with school? That was my philosophy. That reflected in the marks that I was obtaining. I seemed to have personality clashes with the teachers. I found myself up against it with teachers at times. But then Peter Yates, the English teacher, arrived. He replaced the English teacher who was there at that moment in time, and he just saw something in me. And with the new set of exams that had come in, GCSEs, he encouraged me to pick up a book that I was interested in. So we were doing Macbeth, we were doing Brave New World as part of the curriculum, but he allowed me to study The Profession of Violence by John Pearson as part of my GCSE coursework.
I wouldn't say it worried me, it concerned me, because I thought that was a strange choice. However, knowing Stephen the way I do, it it didn't surprise me. And I think if I'd prevented him from doing it, he would have done it anyway. And this is the problem that you have with children. If you tell them not to do it, they'll do it.
I'm pleased to say I passed my exam. I left school with 3 GCSEs, a B and a C in English language and English literature, and I owed a big, thank you to Peter for that. But I decided from that moment that something positive had come from my experience of reading the Krays books, and I thought I really owe some thanks to the Kray twins for this, this turn in my life. So I decided to write to Reg Kray, and I decided to write to Ron Kray, and I'd picked up an article where that said that Reg Kray was in Gartree prison.
You might as well have been Elvis, because Reggie probably got more fan mail than Elvis. Reggie mostly because he was a letter writer. You could write to Reggie on a Monday, and Friday morning you'd have a reply. He used to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning. His letters always were headed 3 a.m. or 3:30 a.m. on the top of the letter. So you knew that he was up writing letters at that time in the morning. He had so many, and so many requests for visits. Not only young, old people, old past people, old boxers that he knew, but also a lot of youngsters that wanted to go and see him.
I received a reply. It was a few days later, and it was a pretty standard reply. It was simply, Steve, thanks for the letter. Kind of keep up with correspondence. God bless Reg. But it was an acknowledgement of the fact that I'd made the effort, and it showed that this person who I'd read so much about had actually responded to me. He thought enough to respond. Looking back now, he clearly had enough time to do that. Parents at the time, my mum was acceptant of it. My dad was shaking his head, wasn't impressed at all that I was communicating with a murderer behind bars, and couldn't really understand the hero worship. And then my mum came back home about 6 months later with a magazine called Take a Break. It was a woman's magazine, and this magazine essentially had a double-page spread on it about a young guy. He was 11 years of age. He was called Brad Lane, and he was from a place called Dunscroft in Doncaster.
Brad Lane was a boy that, according to Reggie, he adopted. He was brought there by his mother to Parkhurst and to other prisons after. And we don't know if it was an official adoption. It could have only been an adoption by letter, because he wouldn't have been allowed out to come to court to adopt him. But he was a young boy that he gave a lot to, not only money, but also introductions to other people that could give him things, because the mother was a friend.
I knew they were in Doncaster, I knew they were in Dunscroft, and I just thought, write a letter to Brad Lane, Dunscroft, Doncaster, and hope for the best. So I put a letter to them and just explained that I had correspondence with Reg, that I was really interested in what they were doing, and if they ever needed any help, then to give me a shout. 3 months later, I got a phone call off them to say, why don't you come over and see us? So I decided to go across to Doncaster to meet Brad and Kim. When I got there this particular day, they were very welcoming, and they came up with tea and biscuits, and we chatted a little bit, and then Brad said, would you like to come up and see some of Dad's stuff? And I went upstairs, and it was like walking into a like a treasure trove of Kray memorabilia. The biggest item they had was Frances Shea's engagement ring that Reg had given her. There was also a lot of suits hanging up which had belonged to Reg in the 1960s. They had some of David Bailey's original wedding photographs. There was lots of letters, and And then there was copies of their first book called Our Story, which had been brought out by Fred Dinage, just boxes and boxes of these books. But it was, in all intents and purposes, a little shrine to the Krays that had photographs on the wall and, you know, different images of Reg, and some of them were signed. So for me as a fan, which is what I was at the time, I was just blown away. It was like all your Christmases come at once, walking around and looking at all of this stuff. Anyway, we headed back downstairs, and as I was getting ready to make tracks and head back to see my friend in Scunthorpe, the phone rings. Reg has got access to his telephone in Gartree and managed to call Brad. Brad runs to the phone, excitedly. It'll be Dad. And he picks the phone up. Hi, Dad. And Reg is on the other end. Kim says, Reg would like to have a word with you, Steve. So I walked up, I took the phone off her, put it up to me ear.
Hello, Steve. Reg Kray, see you Tuesday. God bless.
That was the first time that I spoke to Reggie Kray. He pronounced Newcastle like a lot of Cockneys do. Newcastle. But yeah, it was a unique experience. It was quite a short phone call, but what he did say was that he would like me to go to visit him.
Was it common for them to take an interest in younger boys like Brad Lane?
Well, I guess maybe that's true that they did take an interest in young boys, more so Ronnie, of course. I was told to, any handsome boy that I said I'd seen, or a singer, or a model, because I was modelling at the time, I was asked to bring to Ronnie. With Reggie, it was more friends that had brought maybe young boys up to see him. But then young boys are like they are today. They like the myth of the Kray name, and they wanted to visit.
When I first visited them, it was 1990, so it was essentially, 22 years in to their life sentences. So Reg was a rehabilitated prisoner. He was in Gartree prison, and Ron was by now in Broadmoor Hospital and on heavy medication. Brad was very excited. We were both suited and booted. We both had like a suit, a shirt and a tie on. The VO was handed in. You waited for your number to be called, and then we got taken through the next set of steel doors before we came to a searching area where we would be frisked by the prison officers to make sure that we weren't taking anything in that we shouldn't have been.
I would have bottles of drink tied on bits of string hanging down the inside of my trouser leg, and you'd go through, get your pictures done, and be walked into a visiting room where you were supposed to be not leave the table and sit down with the visitor, and they'd go and get you the cups of tea. But Reg would, all the young prisoners that had no visitors coming to see him, he would have his mates go and visit them. So this poor kid in prison sitting there with a big flat-nosed, bald-headed bank robber visit him, and then on the visit, Reg would get up and go and talk to that mate, and Reg would get up and go and talk to that mate, then Reg would go and talk to that mate that was all sitting there.
I remember it being like a school canteen. It was just lots of noise, lots of people, lots of kids who were obviously there visiting their parent, and lots of prison officers just watching, making sure that nobody was getting out of hand, nobody was doing something that shouldn't have been. There was a queue on the right-hand side at the canteen, so people were getting the refreshments. And there was a door at the far end, as we took our table in the middle of the room, which eventually opened. Prison officer walked through, and then this small, diminutive, white-haired, well-built prisoner came through after him, and that was Reggie Kray.
Reg came out of a back door with a guard behind him, and he sat down with me, and he shook my hand, and the first thing I noticed was he had these piercing blue eyes, and he looked super fit, not an ounce of fat on him. And he also had this amazing presence, which I would say you would probably experience if you'd met some of the great movie stars of our time, say Steve McQueen, Robert De Niro, Jack Nicholson. There was just something about Reg. I mean, yeah, he was a star of the gangster world, and for me, when I met him, he was a star also.
When I met him, he had an aura about him. I'm not glamorising what he did, because what he did is, what he did is part of history and stuff. But he did have an aura about him, the way he presented himself, the way he sat, the way he motioned with his hands, how he spoke. So I knew I was sitting in front of someone who was a serious character.
And then he turned to me, put his hand out and went, "You must be Steve from Newcastle." And that was it, we shook hands.
Were manners important to them?
Well, it's a completely different era there, because we'd all just come out of the army. The country had just come out of a war situation where your morals were high, you know what I mean? You loved your mum, you had shiny shoes, you had creases in your trousers, and manners and polite, and you opened the door for a woman and thank you. Yeah, it was important. Yeah, they liked to dress sharp. There's a bit about their voices, but they liked to dress sharp. They did, talk nice. They didn't talk nice. They didn't talk a lot of sense, but they liked it all nice and neat. And manners was a very, very important thing. Yeah, if you're doing something which is considered by the rest of the world as bad, which is crime, you should at least do it with as much class and manners and in an honourable way that you can.
They got that from their mother, who never ever swore in her life. That was one of the reasons why both of the twins were absolutely furious at the first Cray film, the one that starred the Kemp brothers, because their mother was portrayed in the film, and she swore in the film, and they were furious. They said, "Our mother never swore. We never swore in front of our mother. We never swore in front of our two aunts. We never swore in front of women, period." So that carried on all their life. Of course they swore in front of men, but not in front of me when I had taken men to visit them. I remember taking a man to visit Broadmoor with Charlie Kray on one side, the gentleman on the other side, Jack his name was, and myself, and Ronnie was sitting there chain smoking as usual. We were drinking some coffee and some tea, and just in conversation this man swore, saying, the F word, and he just looked at him with that look and said, "You can leave now." And the man said, "Oh, I'm sorry, Ronnie." He said, "No, I said, you can leave now." And that's all he had to say. The guy had to go up, and I said, "You'll have to wait in the car park, because we'll be another hour and a half."
It was a surreal moment to be there in prison with Reggie Kray, who only a few years earlier had passed my English exam studying. And I remember his grip being really distinctive. It was a strong grip, distinctive grip, hard grip, bony grip. But it was, it was a moment in time. And that handshake meant a lot to me at that time.
Steve isn't a criminal, a notorious figure, so why is he so trusted by them?
He doesn't pretend to try and jump on this ladder of criminality, whatever the term is used. So he's always just been himself. He's not plastic, he's not, he's just a McCoy, which is a non-criminal.
Well, he says it what's weird is you've got that many people who want to mix with criminals and play the gangster card, But he's not. He's just a straight, normal person who tells you that from the beginning. He's not one. He just sees an angle where he can see a good story, and he can put on pen. He can put on paper, and it comes across that way,
You know you can trust him. He's not going to go and blag their secrets to the newspapers, etc. So that's probably how he managed to infiltrate that world and become a good friend to many of them, like Charlie Bronson.
It was a bit wobbly when we first started off, but over the last 20 years, he's become one of my best pals. Nothing is too much for that man to help a mate out. He's always here for me. gives me some good advice.
Once you're known for that circle of friends, then that people know what they can talk to you about, and that's a very small circle of people that you might have around you, that you can only talk about this or you can only talk about that in front of them sort of people. Steve knows a load of different groups of people, and once they all know that they all talk to him and they all talk to him, it makes him a hub, like a job centre.
If Ronnie and Reggie had found something wrong in Steve Wraith, like he'd been disrespectful to women maybe, or sworn, or was uncouth, then he wouldn't have the connection that he has today. But obviously he impressed the whole three brothers.
By the end of it, Reg was interested in me. He was asking me what I was doing for work. Well, at the time I was making t-shirts. I might be able to do a bit of business with you. I've got a t-shirt company. I've often thought about potentially putting your image on these t-shirts, and would you be interested? And he was. He said, look, from my perspective, I would be interested. Yeah, he says, I'll have to speak to Ron, but, you know, come up with an idea and we can have a look at it. And that was it. It was the first business deal between me and the twins. The first idea had been planted. And, you know, I was excited because I thought, maybe I can take this to the next level. Maybe I can get this to, you know, maybe I can get this to work. It was a nice getting to know you meeting. And I think he appreciated the fact that I'd turned up in a suit. Before I left, he did say, I've enjoyed the visit, I've had a smashing visit, but I'd like you to go and see Ron.
I took him to one side and told him that it wouldn't be a day in the park. I advised him and told him exactly what it would be like in a mental hospital and the rigours that he would have to go through to get in to visit.
Broadmoor was a different kettle of fish. Number one, he had psychiatrists, psychologists. He had his own doctor in there. He had his own room in there, which was different than a cell. It was still a prison, but it's a prison hospital.
I was expecting maybe something like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, I suppose, when I was walking through, but it was nothing like that. It was very, you know, very calm, very old, an old feel. And as we crossed the courtyard into the main visiting building, we were then escorted down the corridors, and it had a hospital feel and a hospital smell. Very pale colours, which my mum had already warned me about, which would be common. So there was like a pale blues and pale yellows. And we were walking along this like linoed floor. And then it became apparent we were actually walking past the rooms where these people were actually housed, where they were living.
He could have his own carpet. He bought all his own linen. He bought curtains. He had pictures up on the wall and paintings up on the wall. So he was happy. And medicated, he was quite calm, but still wanted to live exactly inside as he did outside. He was impeccably dressed. I mean, every Friday night he had Harrods deliver him a pork pie, a large pork pie that he'd cut into 3, and he was allowed 2 patients into his room and half a bottle of wine.
And he would come in, survey the room, then walk in, and then come towards your table. And I recognised him straight away, especially having seen Reg, and, you know, they didn't look identical by this stage, but, you know, you knew it was Ronnie Kray, even just down to the way that he was dressed. His opening line will always stay with me, though, and he leaned in, put his hand on my knee, and just said, you don't mind that I'm not bisexual, Steve, do you? And I just laughed, and I went, well, I'm not that way inclined, Ron, you know, each to their own. And he just laughed and nodded and went, good, good.
Everybody has an opinion on their sexuality. I go right back to 1961, when I first went into Valence Road home to meet, and never met any of them before except Charlie, who I'd met in the City Club in Islington, and he asked me to go and do his mother's hair. So the first time I went into the house, I noticed all these shirts. I mean, unbelievable, all down the hall and across the kitchen, the white, beautifully white linen starched ironed shirts on hangers, and I said to her, how many of these do you do a day? And she said, well, my sons are very particular. I have to sometimes do 6 to 8 shirts a day. I thought, my God, the poor woman. But when I met them and they came in, they spoke very quietly. First thing you noticed was how impeccably dressed they were. Second thing you noticed, these are supposed to be really sort of hard men, but they had this very quiet, I could only describe it as quite nasal voice, and slightly, I've got to say, effeminate.
I don't know if you've heard him talk on telly. It's like talking to a 9-year-old. You know, and every time we put his hand on the table, he was frightened of him grabbing your cock.
Ronnie was homosexual, gay, if you like to say that word, and liked young boys, and at his snooker hall and at his other 2 clubs and pubs, he was surrounded by young boys. He used to call them his little spies, and they used to run around the East End doing favours for him, finding out stories, who had done this robbery, who was a bit flush this week, also that he could have his percentage of it.
I think they're both gay. That's Ronnie and Reggie, not Charlie. Charlie was very much a ladies' man. But I think they were both gay, and personally I think he didn't shag that wife of his for a year, and that's why she chopped herself.
When she came back from the honeymoon, I offered to put her hair up in a French pleat that we were all having in those days, and she was talking, and Mrs. Kray said to her, how did the honeymoon go? And I think she considered me as part of the family then, because her words were, I don't know, he never touched me. And I'm standing there just thinking, I won't say a word, let Violet Kray. He said, what do you mean he never touched you? She said, oh, from the very first night when we arrived, we went out to dinner. He brought me back to the hotel. He left me in the hotel room and he went out. He found a casino.
And if I didn't have a shag for a year, I'd most have shot myself too. But, yeah, they were both full-on gay.
Reggie told me himself, Mrs. Kray told me, and Charlie Kray told me that she died a virgin. He never had sexual intercourse with Frances. He put her on a pedestal, nobody could touch her, and he didn't himself. So I think, then when he was in Parkhurst, I knew the 2 boyfriends that he had. So maybe it was latent first and then came out later when he was serving his sentence that he had his boyfriends in prison, but then the man was serving 30 years.
And I was naive, a young naive lad. I didn't know the connotations that a cruise meant for an openly gay man talking to a young boy. But he just said when he got out he would like to take us on a Mediterranean cruise, which of course I nodded and said, yeah, great. Cruise sounds great. A few days later, after the visit, there's a big thud as the letterbox closes. And there's a bit of post for us at the front door. My mum shouts us down. And I run down the stairs and it's this big envelope, familiar scroll on it, Steve Wraith, the address on, but it's in Ron or Reggie's handwriting. At that time I couldn't distinguish between the 2. Rip the envelope open and it's a brochure for Hispanic cruises, Mediterranean cruises. So I laughed, I flicked through it and just a little note in from Ron, looking forward to the cruise. It's a cruise we never went on. The relationship with the Krays developed with a t-shirt idea, I'm pleased to say. Reg really liked it. And I came up with a couple of designs, and he really liked the design that I'd suggested, which was the David Bailey photograph. But the shops couldn't get enough of the T-shirts. We kept running out, and there was an earner going into the Krays bank account from me in Newcastle. So that made me somebody of importance. It made me somebody who was valuable, and it made me somebody who could be used in their eyes, I suppose, to their advantage. We then came up with an idea of having a database. My dad was one of the first people in our street to get a computer and do word processing. And he said, all of these things that you're sending out, all of these orders, you should start building a database. And I said, well, what's a database? And he said, well, collecting the names and addresses and telephone numbers of these people. He said, so when you have a line that you want to push to them, you've got them at the click of a button. And it was a new idea to me, but when I mentioned it to Ron and Reg, they were blown away by the idea. But it made sense. It made complete sense. And they'd written a book. Because they had written a book, other firm members had written a book, the Kray name had suddenly started to become big business and was starting to make a lot of money, and I was a small cog in that wheel.
Can you tell me who Kate Kray was?
She was just a dumpy prostitute, stripper ground lady that just made a pen pal out of Ronnie Kray, the Steve. You know?
I didn't turn up on lots of visits because he said, I want to see her on her own, and he was getting very fond of her. And next minute I knew, he proposed.
Ultimately, it's a relationship that's built on sand because, for starters, Ron is not going to get out. He's in a hospital for the criminally insane. He's also gay. He's not heterosexual, so he's never going to consummate this marriage, this relationship. In all intents and purposes, it's a bit of a farce to make a few quid from the tabloids. It goes ultimately to the other end of the spectrum, and the fallout, the breakdown, it also makes good column inches. Then the books come out. So Kate brought a book out.
I doubt very much if she could actually pick a pen up, to be honest. But she had loads of people write bits about himself and stick them in a book. And she's now doing things on the underworld.
I went on a visit, and before Ron could even get his words out, he was, really frustrated, really angry. And he had a bit of paper. And on the paper, he had a list of people who he wasn't happy with. And on the top of that list was Kate Kray.
Ronnie was very angry with Kate for writing the book. He was also very angry with her because there was this talk that she'd had a little affair that came to light when he had told her he didn't mind her having boyfriends, but...
In the midst of his conversation, he turns to me and says, I need you to get rid of Kate. And I looked at him and I had to take a double take. I said, get rid of Kate.
I don't think he's a nutter.
He asked for a divorce. She said no. I know she didn't want to divorce him because she was very, very fond of him. And I was there on many visits when we came out and I said, Kate, when you walk in, like he changes.
I had to take a double take. I said, get rid of Kate. And he just looked over his glasses and...
By get rid of her, does he mean get rid of her totally, or just have words with her and tell her to keep away? Because nobody could have had words with Kate Kray. She was her own woman.
The threat to kill Kate, could I take it seriously? I would say it was probably tongue-in-cheek, but there was that air of menace that Ron had, which meant it could have been serious. So, it'll always remain an unanswered question.
I think he's genuinely asking. I think he genuinely... 100% he did ask him, and 100% he did mean it. And had Steve said yes, he would have gone right to it.
You asked me how our world changed in the days of the Yorkshire Ripper. We'd already had our days changed as children, with the likes of Brady and Hindley. The days of our youth had gone, basically. We couldn't play out until 10 o'clock anymore, or we couldn't do the things we did as kids anymore. We had to be in for 7. And then eventually them two got caught and convicted, thank God. And it all went back to normal. We were coming up to teenagers then, and we had our teenage life, and everything was great. Getting your 20s. I'd been married then to my first wife, getting your 20s. Well, I was married to my first wife. And you're getting your 20s, and along comes the Yorkshire Ripper.
On another visit to Ronnie Kray, we went through the same procedure. We got into the visiting room, and again, lovely, glorious day. I remember this day in particular because at the far end of the visiting room there was a conservatory and the doors were open, and there was a nice breeze blowing in from the gardens of Broadmoor. And we were sitting there, and the visit had just started, and I was aware of somebody shuffling behind us and then banging me chair. And in the northeast of England, any Geordie would tell you, someone bangs your chair, it's a slight, and you turn round like that, and you're getting ready to say, "Oh, are you knocking my chair?" But on this occasion, I just looked round and I saw this, rather tall guy.
I think Manchester was in shock that he'd started killing in Manchester. I mean, he killed 2 here that we know of, and it changed dramatically for everyone. And the hardest part for me was I was unlucky enough to find the worst one he'd ever killed.
When Sutcliffe had been declared insane, after hearing his voices, he said, he was sent to Broadmoor, and before he got there, it was all over the paper that Ronnie Kray did not want Sutcliffe anywhere near him.
The wave of relief when they caught Sutcliffe. The thing with Sutcliffe was, I knew what he looked like. Because when I found Jean Jordan, I'd already gone over that girl 5 times with my wheelbarrow. And on the time I found her the 6th time, there was a face looking at me in the bushes with a beard.
Black, jet black hair.
And I remember the eyes.
Dreadful piercing eyes.
The slick back hair.
And a vacant look in his face.
Just a face. That's all it was, just a face. Then I looked down and that was it. There was Jean Jordan. All hell broke loose then, and I've never seen so many police cars in my life.
And he literally knocked me chair and hadn't bothered to say sorry. And as he sat down and he's pulling his chair in to sit and have a visit with this very old-looking woman, I turned to Ron, and Ron is seething. He's bright red, and he's gritting his teeth, and he's going, the rat, the slag, the rat, the slag. And it's okay, Ron. I says, he just knocked me chair. And he goes, Sutcliffe, slag. And he was really angry. I'd never seen him like that. I only saw him like that once, but it was Peter Sutcliffe. It was the Yorkshire Ripper who had banged me chair.
The first time I read he'd been attacked in prison, I thought, he hasn't gone far enough. How's he got away with it? How's he survived it? But he didn't, did he? He lost an eye, but that wasn't enough for me. He should have ended there and then on the first attack. Then he was attacked again. He was attacked about 3 times, and 3 times he survived the attacks. And 3 times I was gutted. I was absolutely gutted. To myself, you don't say anything to anyone else, but to yourself, you think, why have they failed? They had a chance to rid the world of evil and get rid of it.
Ron abided and hated anything to do with killing kids, raping women, and anyone in that that kind of field, that kind of area, was fair game for him and his friends inside. And that was quite an unnerving experience once I realised who it was, but even more unnerving seeing Ron's reaction.
One day I was with Charlie Kray and our friend Jack Lee and myself, and we were sitting there waiting, and in walked Ronnie and sat there, and then he looked and he saw Peter Sutcliffe and Sonia Sutcliffe sitting there. She used to read the Bible to him, and she's reading and he's sitting there, and he said to me, "Maureen, get up and move around the table." And I said, "I'm all right here, Ron, you're 15 minutes late, come on, let's start the visit, don't want to start moving." He said, "No, I want you to stand up and move around here." And I said, "Well, tell me why." And he said, "I don't want you to be in the eye line of that slag."
I shouldn't imagine he was on the top of his Christmas card list, and what Ron thought was morally right and wrong, and what Peter thought was morally right and wrong would have been an interesting conversation to listen to.
The feeling was that Sutcliffe killed women, and that would be against all Ronnie's morals. Murder was murder, but to murder women or children, that was what he was against. So he absolutely hated Sutcliffe, and I think a couple of attacks. I know the Parkhurst one, he was attacked in there. Lots of people told me it was on Reggie's orders. Could have been, I don't know, I didn't ask Reggie Kray. And then when he got to Broadmoor, he was blinded. And everybody said that was on the orders of Ronnie Kray. Could have been. It seems funny that both brothers were in different places where Sutcliffe was, but he obviously just did his little smirky laugh when I asked him, his little sardonic laugh, Ronnie, as much as to say, well, think what you think, but the man is a slag and a coward, and we called him all the names under the sun, but nothing swearing in front of me.
They set up the first attack on the Ripper. I'm just sorry they failed. Whether they did the second and third, I don't know. But I know the first one was down to them. And I'm just sorry they failed. They'd have gone up in my estimation if they'd have killed him. They failed.
Brad obviously grew up, became his own man. I always felt a little bit that he was being manipulated by his mother in that relationship. I may be wrong. But yeah, things started to progress, and I started to visit the twins on my own. I would be able to take my friends. I took various people down to meet them. I took the rave band, QFX, to go and visit Reg. He wanted to record a new version of Freedom with them. I took a couple of pals down who were interested in crime. A good friend of mine called Ray Khan, who's no longer with us, who was just obsessed with the Krays, loved the story, and also felt that Reg should be a free man, so I took him down. It came to Reg's mind that he was getting a lot of begging letters, a lot of people who were involved with charities who wanted to, wanted a little bit of the Kray name to use to try and, boost funds. So Reg came up with the idea of bringing back the Cray Parties. And if you read the books about the Krays, there's one thing the Krays could do, and that's throw a good party. So they started utilising their contacts from up and down the country to put on these type of events. And it was simple. You just needed to get a function room and a bar, get a few local celebrities, and then, charge £20 a ticket, and then get Charlie Kray to go and host it. What more could you want for the ultimate Cray party?
We want you to do a charity for this little boy that's become known to us. He's got about 8 weeks to live, and we want to send him to Disney. I thought, okay. But Reggie was the organiser. He'd ring up from the prison, he'd ring the pub, talk to the landlord. Can you imagine getting a phone call from, "Hi, it's Reggie Kray in Parkhurst. We want your pub next Saturday or 2 Saturdays' time. A lady called Maureen Flanagan's going to come and see you. You will supply the food, won't you?"
It was nothing to do with charity at all. There's not a genuine charity bone in the body. It was all done for get a load of me, ain't I a nice guy, what can I get out of this? You know, the romance around the Krays was mythical. There wasn't any in real life. There wasn't any in real life.
Well, there's a lot of talk about their charity work. I suppose I'm probably the best person to speak about that, because I know way back when they were teenage boxers for Repton Boys Boxing Club, they did charity. So where people think it only started in prison, no, it didn't. And also I went to charity events with them, with their mother, when they were on the outside. Again, I know Ronnie used to give the church in Bethnal Green, Father Hetherington, he gave him hampers for pensioners at Christmas. And this is why this priest went to court twice for them and spoke up for them when they were outside, of course. And a priest would not do that if they weren't charitable.
These parties were really, really popular because Reg had now a database, thanks to my dad's suggestion. He could contact people, and he could contact a lot of people. And if he wasn't asking me to do it, he was asking Steph to do it. If he wasn't asking Steph to do it, he'd be asking somebody in Birmingham to do it. And this network, this empire behind bars that he created, was suddenly working for him and generating income and generating money. But then he suddenly wanted me to do things. He wanted me to check up on something.
Hello Steve, Reggie Kray. Would you find me as soon as you can? Let me know what's happening about Lioness Willie. Thank you, up on the ward. But I'd like to see Lioness Willie as well. And he's in Walthamstow, in the High Street of Aberystwyth there. Thank you, God bless you.
There was a distrust of certain people. And on one occasion, I went down to a party where I met a guy called Christian Simpson.
Freddie Foreman's my godfather. He was a good friend of my father's in the 60s. My father worked at a restaurant called Simpson's in the Strand, which is still there today next to the Savoy. Reg was down in Maidstone Prison at the time serving his sentence for Jack the Hat, and asked me to do the security. And that's the first time I met Steve, 1995.
We got on very well. He was a New Zealander. He'd only been in the country a few months, but we hit it off. But this particular night, I'd been asked to go and check that the money that was supposed to be forthcoming to the charity was being put away correctly and going to the right people. And unfortunately, I found out that it wasn't.
Steve found him in a kitchen in a certain club signing the stuff, which was, you know, just so he could make extra money and it wouldn't go back to the hospice where the money should have been going to, or the cancer patient. Normally it's a child.
Now, this guy, I'd met on a visit when I'd seen Reg in Nottingham prison, and he'd been introduced to us as a good burglar. And I said to Reg, well, if he's a good burglar, what's he doing in here?
I think it was Adrian Crawford, a young girl who had leukemia at the time, who was going to the famous hospital here in London.
You shouldn't be taking that. And he basically gave us a load of expletives and said, what's it got to do with you? And tried to throw a right-hander at me. So
Steve chinned him and gave him a proper kicking.
And walked out. I left it at that. It just took one punch. I walked out. Not something I was particularly proud of, but I did it for the right reasons.
What you call skimming off the top, they never made a fortune. They were a couple of £100 here, or, you know, the actual... There was never any big benefit dues. You know, all the people that follow and like the Krays are normally skint. They are the lower end of the market financially. The Kray Twin fans are normally the council estate people.
So I decided to organise a Cray party in the northeast. So I got a venue, got the Lesham Lane, which is no longer there, in Bensham, off a good friend of mine, Davey Folgus. I got a local DJ, Kenny D, to come and do the music for free. I got the tickets printed from a local printers for free and sold them at £10 a ticket. Put a buffet on. It's the only thing I spent money on, really. Reg sent a tape up, which is to be played on the night time.
The friends there in the northeast, I would like to thank you this evening on behalf of my friends Bradley Allardyce and Stephen Wraith and myself for the fact that you are present in support of our young friend Terry Moran and the other children in aid of their charity. I would like to thank all of you and also the celebrities present and my brother Charlie for being host. And once again, I would like to thank you all. Good night. God bless Reggie Kray.
It's a huge success. 300 people there. In all intents and purposes, I've actually walked into the book that I've read, and I'm now playing a part of it. And this is the final part of the Krays story that I'm actually living. I'm in it. I got approached by a young family in Gateshead who had another young boy who had another ailment, a particularly awful disease. And in the build-up to the event, I started getting phone calls off Reg telling me that some of that money that was supposed to be for charity would need to go to him. And I was really uncomfortable with that because this was another local family that I promised to help and a family that I knew, and it didn't sit well with me at all. So we had a few arguments, and this was the first real disagreement that I had with Reg on the phone. Money needs to be taken out of these shows. It's all very well given to charity, but charity begins at home. It taught me a valuable lesson. It taught me that you need to wake up, Steve. You know, this isn't what you thought it was. This is something a bit more serious.
Hello.
Hello, Steve. How are you going?
Fine, how are you?
Okay, fine. But when you phoned me last night, was that the only reason you phoned me? Because I don't think so. But so I'd rather you be straightforward with me. You said you were arranging a night down there using my name. I don't think this is a fact, is it? Yeah. Someone also suggested that you're in touch with newspapers or whatever. That wasn't the reason you phoned me last night for anything for them, was it? You was the one who didn't want the bar check before and this and that and that, which was a normal business procedure to do. That's why we fell out, if you remember.
Yeah, I do.
So really, it's your fault, eh?
I saw the manipulative side of Reggie Kray there, and I didn't like it.
The fact that we've clashed in the past, what I'm going to say now is this. We start fresh, yeah?
Okay.
And be a bit amicable, even if we're not as close as we was, yeah?
Okay.
And see what happens from there, eh?
That's fair enough.
No hard feelings from my point of view. I hope it's the same with you. And that's it, eh?
It became, very easy for Reg to get rid of people. We saw that with Brad and Kim. Just didn't get back in touch with them. Became too much of a vexation to the spirit, as he would say. And, he just moved on to the next person who could help him and who he could hopefully manipulate. It's one of those pieces of history for me, really. Now I look back on it with pride that I stood my ground, but it also gave me that opportunity to probably hone my own business talents, and my own way of dealing with things in that particular world. And I often say that, if you can deal with Reggie Kray in a business deal, you can deal with anybody.
The day Ronnie died, the English and Sons got a phone call saying that they was going to come down to desecrate the body, and not everyone was a Cray Twin fan. And
then I had a phone call from Charlie Kray, and then I had a phone call later on in the day, sort of in the afternoon. He'd booked some phone calls from Reggie, who said, well, I'm going to tell you now, he's going to have a funeral fit for a king. They were his words, and it was probably more so. I was given a lot of instructions from Reggie. I had to get onto that dreadful ferry and get over to Parkhurst, which I hated because I'm frightened of water, but I had to go. And he said he wanted me to do the seating in the church, and that I would have 12 security guards in the church. I said, no, I won't, Reg. He said, well, you'll need them because they'll be sort of all flocking in through the door. I said, no, I can't have any security guards inside the church. Deal with Dave Courtney.
And he said, Dave, I need you to get a few blokes to sleep in the funeral parlour for me for the next 2 weeks while he's in rest. I went, yeah, okay. And getting an army of men together for the day was easier than trying to find 2 blokes to sleep in the funeral parlour all week with me, you know, like, ghost of one thing, the ghost of Ronnie Kray, that's scary, that's a scary one. And so we stayed in there for 2 weeks, and during that 2 weeks, it was going to become apparent that how big this funeral was actually going to be. So he asked me to take over the security for him and run it. I set about trying to put together the strongest, biggest body of men that I could get in my head, and I got what I think was 150 of the most proper, tasty bastards I know from up and down the country. There was Mr. Glasgow, Mr. Newcastle, Mr. Edinburgh, Mr. Liverpool, Mr. Manchester, Mr. Brighton, Mr. Leeds. Right? And a lot of these little firms didn't get on with each other. But on that one day, they all, you know, painted the wall white and just carried on. And a lot of time they hadn't seen each other since they were shooting at each other.
The crowds at Walthamstow, builders on top of buildings. On the Walthamstow dog track, there were buildings doing something on the roof. They were all shouting down and sitting down and watching it. Like people were 3 deep till we got to Chingford. Unbelievable funeral. 26 limos to go over the Bow flyover. I'll just never forget it. And then when we got there, at least Reggie, although handcuffed, was allowed this time to go to his twin's grave. He laid his wreath. He laid a wreath on his ex-wife, Frances. He laid a wreath there. He always kisses the headstone. Very, very sad, but at least he was allowed at the graveyard.
Hello, Steve, it's Charlie. I'll ring you up to thank you for a lovely night. I'll speak to you later anyway, Steve. Thanks, mate. God bless.
The relationship with Charlie was completely different to the relationship with the twins. Charlie was such a party animal.
A ladies' man, definitely. Women loved him. They liked to be with him in his company.
A flamboyant looking geriatric, I suppose, is the best way to describe him. But he had the suntan, he had his comb over, he had every type of suit. Always looked the business.
Always took care of you. His handshake was kind. Everybody felt that they wanted to be out with Charlie Kray, but unfortunately he had the twins.
Hello, friends and supporters. If you wish to contact myself for any business matters, projects or whatever, please do so by contacting Steve Wraith, and do not contact my brother Charlie for this, because his business matters and mine are entirely separate.
Imagine you're ticking along nicely at 14 years old, your mum gives birth to Ronnie and Reggie Kray. Fucking hell, what a nightmare you got for that, right?
He'd been a professional boxer, but not like them in nature at all. They had terrible tempers and terrible violent traits that Charlie didn't have. He took after his mother.
My relationship with him was fantastic. You know, we'd often ring up and just have a chat, or you know, if I was down in London, he would take you out. Laws had changed. Very easy to set somebody up with laws which say that if you have a conversation about something and then something happens, then you are literally involved and you can be done for conspiracy. And in fact, you are the main organiser of something. And that's exactly what happened. I felt, having read the depositions, that it was entrapment. Charlie was approached by undercover police officers at his birthday party. They integrated into his social circle. They then asked him if he could get any cocaine. And of course he said yes. He introduced the police, unbeknownly, to two of his associates. Those associates said that they could supply X amount of cocaine, and
they say, Charlie, you still see the boys? They go, yeah, but brandy coat. And then they go, could you get me a combined harvester, Charlie? They go, I'll have a chat with the boys, get me a brandy coat. Charlie, can you get someone shot? Of course, well, get a brandy coat. And then someone, can you get me Kid Charlie? Yeah, I'll have a chat with the boys, get a brandy coat. And then the couple went back and went, can you really get me one? And he went, yeah, I'll get you one, I'll get you. Brandy coat. And then come back again and went, where would I go to get this thing? And he went, Ron, you still do the thing? Yeah, here, get some, brandy coat, and that's it.
The doors went in when the deal was done, and Charlie didn't have any cocaine at the house. He didn't have any money at the house. He was living with his girlfriend at the time.
When the two brothers went away, he was left as you're in charge of the Cray firm. It's like, fuck off. I just want to work in McDonald's. But no, you're the boss of the Cray firm.
Essentially, he was arrested because his name was Cray. It was a farce from start to finish. And it was a farce which essentially cost Charlie his life.
And he paid dearly for that. He paid dearly for another 10 years for that, I think.
We went to court that day, and I couldn't believe who was getting into the witness box before me. Dave Courtney, of course, he's a good friend of mine.
I was his character reference in his last court case, actually. Obviously didn't do him no good because he got 12 years of it.
Gave a good account of himself. Said that Charlie, was, somebody who he trusted and, knew he wouldn't get involved in drugs, abhorred drugs, wouldn't have been involved. And I thought Dave gave a really good account of himself. Then Frankie Fraser went in. Mad Frankie Fraser, who of course was synonymous with the Richardson gang, the rivals of the Krays. And he was good friends with Reg during his later years and good friends with Charlie as well. As he came out of the witness box, he turned to the judge and went, "Thanks very much, Your Honour. It's the first time I've left court a free man."
I quite enjoy the courtroom banter. Yeah, I'm a little bit of a specialist at that myself, but I don't think he done it in the army. He was getting it because his name was Cray, whether Frankie Fraser said the joke or not, to be honest.
I don't think anybody in their wildest dreams could have expected the sentences handed down, but Charlie got 12 and 8 to run, together. 12 years when you're in your 70s, in a maximum security prison, it's a death sentence.
To be honest, I found Charlie an old, sad figure in prison, he didn't belong there. A sorrowful figure, if anything,
Why do you think he didn't belong there?
He was far too old. He was far too old for the prison system. He was an old man. He was on the last couple of years of his life where he spent about 6 months for me, mostly a couple of years each day in Franklin. And you could see his health was deteriorating each day, As I said, it wasn't a figure people looked up to. If anything, you felt sorry for him.
My last visit to him was in a place called Franklin Jail, which is a maximum security prison in Durham. He'd become friends with Paul Ferris and Stephen Sayers, who were looking after him inside. And he came out of the cells and came up to me at the table. I got his refreshments for him. And the hair dye had gone. He had this grey hair. The sun tan had gone. The sunbeds obviously stop when you're inside, and he was grey, sallis kind of looking. Lost a lot of weight. He was never fat, but just lost a considerable amount of weight, and just a very, very sad figure. And the bubble and the charm and the wit had, although there was flashes of it there, and there was still a little bit of a twinkle in the eye, that had really just finished him off. And within 6 months of me seeing him, Charlie was dead. The depositions were a little bit concerning for me as well, because I also found my name in those depositions alongside the name of the Sayers family, and I was mentioned in those depositions 4 times. And when I cast my mind back to Charlie coming to Newcastle to meet the undercover police officers, he'd asked me on a couple of occasions to meet up with him, which I couldn't do because I was on holiday. I was implicated because Charlie had rang me and asked me if he could meet me, and I said no. So there was handwritten notes within these police notes: Steve Wraith, fanzine editor, Newcastle, connected to, and I was blown away with that. And again, another wake up call to say, you're in too deep here. You shouldn't be involved with these people, because, although you're doing nothing wrong, it doesn't take much to be set up in this situation. And yeah, it was a wake up call.
Can you tell me a bit about Roberta, Reggie's wife?
He'd said that he'd been talking to a lady that was involved with a video company, and she'd like to come to see him. She only lived in Kingsland Road in the East End at that time. Would I bring her with me on my next visit? I had a boyfriend at the time that was going to drive me to Maidstone, so we picked her up. And very pleasant lady, intelligent. I thought, well, she'd be good, I thought, as a pen pal or just a visitor for Reggie. But apparently they became very close and eventually married.
Ron's death had a major impact on Reg as well. I think he just got his mind more focused, and he had to try and concentrate on getting out of prison and trying to get parole.
I definitely think Reg should have been released long before he was. I think he'd, if you like, done his time, learned his lesson.
I doubt he wouldn't have gone back into crime, but he was just an idiot. It's just a shame. It's better he died in there. It keeps a myth. Nothing or no one is as big as a myth. Nothing or nobody is as big as a myth. Not the Krays, not Dave Courtney. And it was better that they stayed where they were and kept mythical. Because had them 2 little men come out and everyone actually saw what they were, it would have popped the myth, because they were pathetic. You know what I mean? Tiny little midgety, cock-sucking.
There's no doubt in my mind that Reg Kray should have been released. Ron Kray always knew that he would die within the confines of, a hospital or prison. And he accepted his fate. He was, he's mentally ill. He was a paranoid schizophrenic.
I'm not a judge or part of the Home Office, but I do believe that Reggie should have been released way before he was released, of course. I'm not sure about Ronnie. I don't know Ronnie, as in I never met him. And I know he was in Broadmoor mental institution, but I think they were, with things what kids do these days and other criminals and sex offenders and so the sentences they get, and also murderers who do much more awful crime. I know it's going to sound bad, I'm not supporting them, but they only hurt their own, They didn't go out and do wrong to other people. And I know that's something which is repetitive over many documentaries and how people speak about them. But yeah, I think they should have been released way sooner than they did. And it's interesting to know that the government or the Home Office knew about Reggie Kray's cancer way earlier than they, it become public knowledge.
He was complaining of these terrible stomach pains that he was having, and he was being treated, would you believe, with milk of magnesia. Well, I can remember when our mother gave us a spoonful of milk of magnesia when you had a tummy ache, and he wasn't having the right medical care in there, and she really was insistent on him going to a hospital for an x-ray, and eventually they listened to her and he got an x-ray, and that's when he was diagnosed, no, it's stomach cancer.
It was an end of an era when Reg died. Of the Cray bit, but I mean, there's still Freddie Foreman here, he's still the governor of the lot, there's still Freddie, but it was the end of an era, and it was like burying a monarch for naughty people. Like the Cray twins dying, it was almost like Prince Philip or the Queen. Genuinely, they were monarchs. They weren't criminals when they died, they were monarchs.
And yet they waited to 6 weeks when the doctor's obviously diagnosis was he could die within 2 months.
Reggie's death, it was more of a time for thought, because that's when I started to really think about how our relationship had changed in the 10-year period. We'd gone from, me wearing a suit and going down to Gartree with his adopted son, Brad, and, being flavour of the month, if you like. Then getting into a working relationship with him and his twin brother, making them money, making the Krays money, and making myself money. Then going through an argumentative period where he would try to manipulate me to do what he wanted me to do, and I rebelled against it and proved that I had my own mind and that I wasn't easily influenced, and that if I didn't want to do something, then I wouldn't do it. Then almost like a fadeaway.
Why were they inside for so long?
Down to the name, it's not as simple as that. He was a political prisoner. I always feel that the fact that they were integrated with the likes of Lord Boothby and Tom Dryburgh, and there was a lot of skeletons and a lot of high profile people's cupboards and closets, that was the reason that they were made an example of. And there was a lot of photographs and a lot of cine material of very well-known people in compromising positions, which if it had ever got out would have damaged reputations and probably would have overturned governments. But that material, to my knowledge, was destroyed by accident. When the Krays doors went through in 1968, Charlie Kray told me that he'd told his wife of the time, Dolly, to get rid of the stuff that she knew about. I think with Jack the Hat, the big problem was he didn't ever feel remorse about killing him. I spoke to him about it on more than one occasion, and if he'd only shown remorse, I think the system would have been a lot more lenient on him. I think he would have had an opportunity of parole maybe a bit earlier. But the fact he never said sorry for that is probably that reason why he was kept inside for so long. But he was never sorry, because he always felt it was either him or Jack. If he didn't kill Jack, then Jack would have killed him. And that was always his feeling about it. He also talked about another body. And a lot of people ask me, who was the other body? Who was the other murder? Who else did they kill? A lot of speculation, a lot of rumours. Teddy Smith was always the big one, but we all knew that Teddy Smith was in Australia, and it proved to be the case when Teddy passed away recently, and the passport photo emerged of Teddy, who'd managed to get to Australia and set up a new life. My mind's always cast back to the young boy who died when Reg was a kid, who was run over by a vehicle on the streets of London. I always feel it was him, because I know Reg was traumatised by that as a young kid. It was never reported to the police, and that kid was obviously murdered. Well, he was killed, and I always feel that is something which Reg could have been talking about. The more obvious one, of course, is Frank Mitchell, but the twins didn't kill him, so it could be that one. They were tried for it, but obviously it was thrown out and never proven. So it could be that one, but it's nothing more than that. There's no mass grave of Kray victims which have never been revealed. For me, it's as simple as that. His relationship with Roberta changed things for everybody, and I think that showed subsequently with Reg's funeral. I didn't want to go wearing a suit. I didn't wear a suit on a day-to-day basis. That idea of respected had moved on, and I wasn't spending as much time with Kray-related stuff. It was parked on the bookshelf like the books behind me, and I wanted to go and pay me respects, but I wanted to do it in a different way. So rather than making the usual phone calls, which I would have made to try and get in the church or be part of it, I decided that I wanted to just go down and walk alongside the cortege and then go home. I didn't even go to Chingford to see him laid into the ground. I gave him, I went to English's funeral parlour. I watched the body, the coffin loaded on. Then I walked with Reg and the cortege from English's to St Matthew's. And then I stood across the road as the cortege cars filled up again. And that's it.
Why do you think it is that 60 years after their infamy, they're still talked about so much?
The enduring appeal of the Krays, number one reason is probably that there was no one else like them. They were unique, and they also led quite a glamorous lifestyle with their various clubs, and they'd be mixing with movie stars, etc., and rock stars in the West End. And they also knew a lot of politicians, so they lived quite an exciting life.
They were legends, unique. There was only two like them. There was no one else like them. They had good hearts, hearts of a lion. They were fearless. And the way they done their bird, they never moaned. They got on with it. If something needed doing, they'd fucking do it. They was legends, mate, and that's why they were special.
They were made mythical, like put it like a princess in the tower. But had they been out and people been able to see them, no one would have respected that. It's romantic, you understand? I mean, it's romantic, that cowboys, knights in shining armour, pirates, gangsters. They're romantic, but if you're going to start analysing the actual people, the Kray twins, what were they like? Dickheads.
They fascinate a lot of people, how they went about their business, because they were kind to people. They raised money, they looked after people. But if you got on the wrong side of them, well, so be it, sort of thing.
The reason that they will always be infamous and talked about is because David Bailey and John Pearson gave them that platform. David Bailey with the photographs and John Pearson with the book, which I picked up and read as an influential teenager. And that is why they will always be the number one gangsters in the UK.
Why do people keep talking about them? It's beyond me, because they wouldn't last 5 seconds in this day and age.
Do I think two up-and-coming young boxers out the East End of London could do what the Krays did? Hopefully I won't think they'd want to. I think they'd want to concentrate on being champion boxers, maybe in more of a gangster life. I think the days when the Krays were running are totally different now. It's so totally different. Police forces are 1,000 times upgraded now than it was then.
They'd have never got away today with what they did years ago. Because there's young boys out on the street now, 15 years old, with Uzis. It's more dangerous and violent now than it's ever been in this world. It's a crazy, crazy world now, and people are killing people for the sake of killing them.
Not in the slightest. I don't think that the two... look, don't forget, England had just come back from war. There wasn't a lot of men to actually compete with, yeah? There wasn't a lot of men there, and it was a lot easier running Bethnal Green when there was 20,000 people in Bethnal Green and they all spoke and understood English, right? Now you couldn't find 20 people that could say the name Krays, right? So, no, that it would mean nothing. It'd be nothing.
All the people they killed, well, if they didn't kill them, they would have been killed themselves, wouldn't they? It was, I'll kill you or you kill me. But nowadays, it's a different era. In prison, they would have survived, the same as they always survived.
The Sears brothers, for example, in Newcastle, are a prime example. 3 brothers who came from a broken home, but with a doting mother, who all went into crime.
The country, unfortunately, now is full of really, it's not the same place as it was years ago. I mean, when you're living in the East End of London, I was down there recently, and it's like it's a Bangladeshi community now, and I dare say if you went and asked for some protection money, insurance money, call it whatever you like, of some Bangladeshis, I think they'll get a gang together and come and create a war with you. You know, they're not really bothered who you are.
Who knows? Who knows what potential people can have, or what they're capable of doing. Anybody's capable of doing something extreme, you know. In their case, they've done it on numerous occasions.
It has already happened in the UK. The Adams family in London, all brothers, all in some way, shape or form have been involved in that type of crime. The Arifs, the Richardsons. So to say that it could never happen again, I don't think anybody can say that.
Anyone looking up to these 2 individuals, you know, think about it logically. They weren't great criminals. They got caught. They were capitalising on a time where London was in turmoil just after the Second World War. I wouldn't exactly put the words noble and the Krays twins together. It wasn't like love thy neighbour and help thy neighbour out as much as they're glamorising it on films or books. You know what I mean? Walking old ladies across the street. They weren't those types of people. You know, they weren't creative. They weren't making other people's lives better. I think with the internet now, you can do so much more with your life. They're not the Biggie Smalls or the Tupac of East London. They were just 2, in my eyes, blatant arseholes that capitalised on just being wrong. They're 2 wrong uns. There's nothing inspirational about them 2. And I don't think they're a landmark of London. I think they're a downfall of London.
What life is it? Do they want to spend 30 years or maybe full life with no parole, locked up in a tiny room, you know, slopping out, wearing, you know, they might wear a tracksuit that their mother sent in, but their freedom's taken away. A lot of men go in, their women are pregnant. Where are they going to see this child? This child is going to be brought in on visiting days. Oh, hello, Daddy. But I've seen in Parkhurst, when I was sitting with Reggie, I've seen very, very hard men. Murderers some, robbers some, but I've seen them cry when that bell goes and it's time for that kid to get off their lap. And they're hanging round their neck saying, can you come home with us, Daddy? Oh, and I hear it and they're on the next table and I think, oh my God, I've got a son. Please, God, don't let him do anything ever like this. And the kid is being pulled away by the mother. And we're coming next week to see Daddy. You're going to bring him up that drawing you bought. And the kid walks in with the drawing the next week and the man starts crying. What for?
Well, personally speaking, I think like a lot of them I can't understand where they're coming from because it's probably the only escape. But I've lived this life, you know, and I've had a chance to change things around. Given a choice, I'd rather work in Tesco's or be a postman, you know, and it's basically my life was being a criminal.
The thing about the bad guy is he never knows he's the villain of the piece. He thinks he's doing right, no matter what he does. That's his profession.
Just concentrate on your sport. Don't go there. You know, they didn't really have a life in the end, did they? They spent most of it sat in a cell. They weren't doing much boxing in prison, were they? And they weren't getting much glory in there, so stick with your sport. You're better off.
I've always said, if you're going to commit a crime, do it on your own. Make sure the money's out of the country within 24 hours and don't spend any of it for quite a few years. That's my tip.
Even young kids who I can see are going to go that way. My advice, strong advice to them is, do what my 2 sons done. Get yourself a job, an apprenticeship, get yourself a job. Get your qualifications, because if you don't get qualifications, you'll go nowhere. And today there's cameras everywhere. If you want to be a villain or a thief, or even crime's completely changed from back when I was a young kid. It was I think a lot of it now is all drug related.
Don't. I've just lost someone who tried to be like that. You get killed. You get killed. There's no easy way out of that one. You get killed.
There's many hardcore villains in all different communities who try and speak to the young youth, but it's hard to get through. Look at the knife crime now, and the violence. It's fucking mayhem. It's mad.
You can get attacked in prison for doing what you do. I don't think they've got a life once they go in there. Brady and Inley certainly didn't have. No, he wouldn't have had. These are not people to look to. These are not people to look up to, no.
It won't be until they're 40 or 50 and they realise that when they've been put away from the age of 20 and lost out, 15 years or 16 years of their life, what a waste.
So don't try and emulate these people, because it'll just get you in nothing but a lot of trouble. They're not heroes.
They're not crime books, they're not teaching you how to be a criminal. They are history books of what used to happen, what it used to be like and what you could get away with, right? You are not fighting the police anymore, you're fighting technology, and you can't be that. So stop it, right? Look, crime is only glamorous on the big screen and in the book. In reality, you're in prison with it, mate. Don't.
You're on your own.
My advice for all the youngsters who are about to go into a life of crime, put the brakes on. Stop and think about it. Don't do it. It's a mug's game. One day in prison is one day too long. It's one day of your life, and you never get it back. Ever. Just think about it. Alright, you might get a nice few quid. You might get away with 5 or 6 robberies. But at the end of the day, you're going to get caught on one of them. And you're going down. Going down. 10 years, 20 years. And while you're inside, your girlfriend leaves you. Your family die. You end up on your own. Look at me. I'm close to getting out now. 4.5 fucking decades I've been inside. 4.5 decades. And when I get out, it's going to take me 6 weeks to visit all the fucking graves. Show my respects to the people I've loved and lost. Just do yourself a favour, lads. Put the brakes on. Think about it. Because if you don't, your life's going to end up a very cold and empty place. Right now it's a laugh and joke. Getting a few bob, buying a nice motor, blah, blah, blah. But it don't last. It does not last. And it takes a real geezer, a real man, to get married and have some kids and be a good man, be a good dad. Remember that. But at the end of the day, it's your choice. All I'm saying is, think about it. Alright. Your old China, Charlie Salvador. Gracias, señores. Adios, amigos. See you at my freedom party.
I guess when I was a teenager, I looked at these people as a role model. Alongside my posters of Peter Beardsley, Paul Gascoigne, Kevin Keegan, Paul Weller, Morrissey, on my wall was a picture of Ronnie and Reggie Kray. I idolised these people. And I didn't become a villain. So I would say to any youngster who happens to pick up a book like I did, take out of it the positives, not the negatives, but certainly don't follow in their footsteps, because there is no life in a life in jail. And it is the one bit of advice that Reggie Kray gave me on a regular basis, on visits, in various visiting rooms. Steve, don't follow in our footsteps.